I never thought a simple Uber ride would turn into one of the most unforgettable nights of my life. But there I was, sitting in the back seat, nervously checking my phone, wondering if this guy, my driver, was going to let me walk away. At first, it was just a normal ride home after a long day. I was tired, craving nothing more than to collapse on my couch and binge some mindless shows. But the guy behind the wheel, he wasn't making it easy to forget the world outside the car. My day had been the usual mess of deadlines and small talk I didn't want to have. I'd been at a work event downtown, and by the time I wrapped up, the city was already slipping into that late-night vibe where everything feels a little different. Quieter, but charged with possibility. I ordered the Uber on a whim, mostly because I was too drained to brave the subway. When the app pinged to say my driver had arrived, I headed out to the street, spotting his car parked under a flickering street lamp. He was standing there, waiting, and the first thing I noticed was his smile. Not the kind of smile you flash at strangers out of politeness, but one that seemed genuine, like he was actually glad to see me. His eyes caught mine immediately, warm, steady, and somehow familiar. He introduced himself as Sam, tall with a casual confidence and a subtle nervousness that made him approachable in a way most drivers aren't. The ride started off normal enough. We made the usual small talk about the weather, traffic, and how the city was a little too loud at night. But as we pulled out of the busy downtown streets, something shifted. Sam's voice lowered a bit when he asked what I was up to, and I found myself telling him about the event, the stress, and how I was trying to shake off the day. He listened, really listened, and that in itself was rare. Halfway through the ride, I noticed how he kept stealing glances in the rearview mirror. Not out of duty, but because I caught him looking. He asked if I wanted to switch the music from whatever playlist I had going, and instead of the usual generic pop hits, he put on something softer, a little more intimate. The atmosphere in the car changed. It felt less like a ride, and more like a chance encounter that neither of us wanted to end. When we pulled up to my apartment, I already had that sinking feeling in my gut, the kind you get when something good is about to stop, but you don't want it to. I thanked him, reached for the door handle, but Sam hesitated, and then he said something I didn't expect. "Do you want to keep driving? I don't have to end the ride if you don't want to." There was a pause. I looked at him, caught completely off guard. Here was this stranger, offering to drive me around just to spend more time with me. Normally, I'd shrug it off or make some excuse, but that night, something about his earnestness made me say yes. And that's when I realized this wasn't just any Uber ride. It was the start of a story I wasn't ready to forget. I blinked, caught off guard by the offer. "You mean like just drive around? No destination?" I asked, half joking, half curious. Sam nodded, that slight nervous edge still there. "Yeah, honestly, I don't get many rides like this, where I feel like I'm actually talking to someone, not just shuttling them from point A to B. If you want, we can just keep going. No pressure." I laughed softly, feeling the tension in my chest loosen just a bit. "You know what? Why not? It's not like I have anywhere better to be." He smiled wider, almost relieved. He adjusted his grip on the steering wheel and pulled back onto the street, the city lights blurring past the windows. For a moment, all I could do was watch the world outside, the neon signs, the occasional late-night jogger, the way the rain from earlier that day had left the pavement slick and glistening. Inside the car, the music was low, a mix of soft indie tracks I couldn't quite place, but they fit the mood perfectly. "So," Sam said, glancing at me through the rearview mirror again, "you don't get many chances to just unwind?" I shook my head. "Not really. My job's one of those that demands you to be on, all the time. So when I'm off, I mostly just want to disappear into my apartment and pretend the world doesn't exist." He nodded thoughtfully. "I get that. Driving at night is kind of my escape. The city feels different, calmer but alive, you know?" I smiled. "Yeah, it does." We settled into an easy rhythm after that. The kind of conversation that starts shy and awkward but grows into something natural. I found myself telling him about my favorite spots in the city, the terrible pizza place I swear by, and the little bookstore I visit when I need to feel grounded. He talked about why he started driving Uber, Something about paying off bills, but also about meeting people, hearing their stories. At one point, he pulled up near a small park by the river. The city skyline glittered in the distance. "Want to stop for a bit?" he asked. I hesitated, surprised by the sudden change of plans. But I nodded, and he cut the engine. We got out, the cool night air wrapping around us as we walked to the river's edge. There was something about the way the city lights shimmered on the water, the faint hum of distant traffic, and the quiet between us that suddenly made everything feel a little more real. "I don't do this often," Sam said, breaking the silence. "Stop somewhere, I mean. Usually it's just drop off. Next ride, repeat." I looked at him, the honesty in his voice disarming. "Why tonight?" He shrugged, looking down at the pavement. "I guess because I didn't want the ride to end, because something about this felt different." My heart skipped. I wasn't sure if it was the way he said it, or how his eyes met mine, searching. I cleared my throat. "Same here." We stood there for a while, neither of us rushing to fill the space. Then he pulled out a pack of gum from his pocket and offered me one. I accepted, the simple gesture somehow intimate. As we walked back to the car, I felt a buzz of excitement that had nothing to do with the night air. It was rare to connect with someone like this, especially when you least expect it. Back in the car, he asked, "So where now?" "I'm all yours." I thought about it. Most nights I'd have said home without hesitation. But tonight, home could wait. "Surprise me," I said. He grinned, and the car pulled away from the curb, tires humming softly against the asphalt. The rest of the night was a blur of narrow streets, quiet neighborhoods, and spontaneous detours. We stopped by a 24-hour diner for coffee, shared stories about our childhoods, and debated whether the city had really changed or if it was just us seeing it through different eyes. At one point, I caught him looking at me again, that same steady warmth in his gaze that made my chest tighten. When he finally asked if I wanted to grab a bite at a little late-night taco joint he knew, I didn't hesitate. Sitting across from him under the flickering neon sign, the way he laughed at my terrible jokes made me realize I'd been craving more than just a ride home all along. Eventually, the sky began to light with the first hints of dawn, and the reality of the day ahead crept back in. But Sam didn't seem in a rush to end things. As we drove back toward my apartment, the silence felt comfortable, almost like we were both savoring the last few moments of a night neither of us wanted to say goodbye to. When the car finally rolled up in front of my building, I reached for my wallet, ready to pay, but Sam stopped me. "Keep it," he said, voice low. "Consider it a tip for making this night unforgettable." I smiled, heart pounding. I'd say it was worth every penny. He looked at me one last time before opening the door. "Maybe this isn't the end." I swallowed hard, the night lingering between us like an unspoken promise. And just like that, I knew that ride, our ride, was only the beginning. I stood there for a moment, the car door opened behind me, the first pale light of dawn stretching across the pavement. Sam's words echoed in my head. Maybe this isn't the end. It felt like the city itself was holding its breath along with me. I glanced back at him, half expecting him to disappear into the morning traffic like some fleeting dream. But he was still there, leaning against the car, arms crossed, that same small smile playing on his lips. "Well," I said, running a hand through my hair, suddenly feeling a little ridiculous standing outside in my work clothes. "So what do we do now?" He shrugged, eyes bright with a mix of hope and something I wasn't quite ready to name. "I'm off in a couple of hours. Want to grab breakfast? I don't have to work today." Breakfast. That sounded like the kind of real-world thing people do after nights like this, when the magic either fades or turns into something else. I hesitated only a second, then nodded. "Yeah, let's do that." We got back in the car, and this time the drive was quieter, filled with the kind of comfortable silence that comes from two people who don't need to fill every moment with words. I found myself stealing glances at him, watching how the early sun caught his hair, how his jaw clenched just a little when he concentrated on the road. When we pulled up to a little hole-in-the-wall diner, the kind of place that looked like it hadn't changed since the 70s, I smiled. "This looks promising." Sam grinned, pushing open the door and leading the way inside. The smell of frying bacon and brewing coffee hit me like a warm hug. We squeezed into a booth near the window, the day outside creeping in slowly. "So," Sam started, leaning back, "tell me more about you." "Like, not the surface stuff." I blinked, a little surprised by the sudden shift. Not the usual, what do you do stuff? Nope. I want to know what makes you tick. What gets you out of bed besides work? I thought about it. It's not often someone asks that with genuine interest. I guess I like the little things. Finding new coffee shops, wandering around the city without a plan, reading late into the night. He nodded, listening. Sounds like you crave a bit of freedom. Yeah. Freedom and feeling like there's something waiting to surprise me. What about you? He smiled softly. I used to be a musician. Played in a band in college. Life got in the way though. Bills, family stuff. Driving Uber's the fallback, but sometimes I still dream about playing shows. Something about that made him even more real to me. Not just a driver, but a guy with hopes and stories tucked away beneath the surface. We talked for hours, even though the diner staff began cleaning around us and the morning rush started to swell. The conversation flowed easily, the kind that makes you forget about time or what's supposed to come next. At one point, he reached across the table and brushed a crumb off my jacket. The touch was so light, so deliberate, I felt a shiver run down my spine. You know, he said quietly, I'm really glad you said yes to that extra ride. Me too, I admitted, looking down at our hands now resting close but not quite touching. Outside, the city was waking up fully, the noise growing, people bustling by. But inside this little bubble, everything else faded away. Eventually, reality caught up. I had to get ready for work, and Sam had his own plans. We exchanged numbers with a promise to stay in touch, a phrase that felt weighty with unspoken possibilities. As I walked to my building, my phone buzzed. A message from Sam. Coffee again soon? I'm free this weekend. I smiled, the kind of smile that feels like the first chapter of something you didn't see coming but are glad it did. I typed back, definitely. That morning, on an ordinary street corner under the waking sky, a simple Uber ride became the start of something real, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. The weekend couldn't come soon enough. I kept replaying that night and morning in my head, the way Sam's eyes crinkled when he laughed, how his voice dipped just enough to make me lean in, even across a diner booth. I wasn't usually the type to get swept up in something so fast, but there was this pull I couldn't ignore. When Saturday rolled around, I texted him back. Coffee at that place you mentioned? He replied almost instantly. Perfect. 11 a.m.? We met at a small cafe tucked between a record store and a vintage clothing shop. The kind of place that smelled like freshly ground beans and old books. Sam was already there when I walked in, casually dressed in jeans and that same easy smile. Hey, he said, standing to pull out my chair. Hey yourself. I grinned, settling in. The conversation started off light, talking about music, the city, what we liked to do when we weren't working. But there was a different energy this time, something more charged beneath the surface. Like we both knew we were dancing around something real, something fragile. After a while, Sam leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on mine. So tell me what you're looking for, honest to God. I swallowed, surprised by the question. I guess I'm tired of the usual, the surface level stuff. I want something that matters, someone who sees me, not just the version I put out there. His gaze softened. Yeah, I get that. I've spent too long hiding behind what people expect. There was a pause, a weight between us that made my heart pound. Can I be honest? He asked. Always. He hesitated, then said, I've never really done this before. Letting someone in, I mean. I'm scared of messing it up. I smiled, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Me too. That simple contact was electric, like a spark jumping between us. I could tell he felt it too, because his smile grew, a little shy, but full of something hopeful. The hours slipped by. We talked about everything and nothing. Our fears, dreams, the awkward moments that made us who we are. When the sun started to dip, casting long shadows through the cafe windows, I realized I didn't want the day to end. Want to take a walk? I suggested. He nodded. We wandered through the streets, the city alive around us but somehow quieter when we were together. At some point, he slipped his hand into mine, and I didn't pull away. The world shrank to just us. We found ourselves in a small park, the kind with benches and old trees, leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze. Sam stopped walking, turning to face me. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. My heart raced, but I nodded. That kiss was tentative at first, gentle, like testing the water. But then it deepened. Warm, urgent, the kind that makes you forget everything else for a moment. When we finally pulled apart, Sam laughed softly. "I've been wanting to do that since our first ride." I smiled, resting my forehead against his. "Me too." We stayed there for a while, wrapped in each other's arms. The night folding around USA's, we walked back toward the city lights, hand in hand. I realized something. Sam, this connection, this unexpected chance, was exactly what I'd been waiting for, even if I didn't know it yet. And maybe, just maybe, the ride that didn't want to end was really just the beginning. The days that followed felt like walking on the edge of a dream I half expected to wake up from any second. But Sam was real, more real than I'd given myself permission to believe. We kept texting, calling, meeting up whenever we could, each moment peeling back layers I didn't know I had. One evening, about a week after that night in the park, he invited me over to his place. I was nervous, more so than I'd been on any date before. It wasn't just about seeing where the night would go, but about stepping into his world, a more private side of him. His apartment was cozy, a bit messy in that lived-in way that felt genuine. Old concert posters lined the walls, and scattered around were little reminders of his musical past. A guitar leaned against the couch, stacks of vinyl records by the turntable. He poured us drinks, and we settled on the couch, close but not quite touching yet. The air between us was thick with anticipation. So he started, grinning. "This is where I hide when I'm not driving strangers around the city." I laughed. "I like it. Feels like a place with stories." "Yeah, plenty of those," he said, eyes catching mine. "But the best one might be the one we're starting." My chest tightened. "I'd like that." We talked for hours. About music, family, the fears we carried like old baggage. I told him about my own struggles. The loneliness that sometimes settled in despite being surrounded by people. The weight of expectations I felt crushing down. He listened, really listened, and when he reached out to take my hand, it wasn't just a gesture. It was an unspoken promise. Later, when the music shifted to a slow, familiar song, he pulled me closer. The kiss this time was different, more confident, like we were both ready to let go of the walls we'd built. When I finally left his apartment in the early morning hours, the city was still quiet, and I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Hope. But it wasn't all easy. Over the next few weeks, as we grew closer, reality kept creeping in. Sam's job was unpredictable, and sometimes I'd find myself wondering if this was just a beautiful detour or something more permanent. One night, after a late dinner, we sat on his fire escape, looking out over the city skyline. "I don't want this to be just a chapter," I said, my voice low. He squeezed my hand. "Neither do I. But I'm scared, man. What if I'm not enough? What if this falls apart?" I turned to him, meeting his eyes. "We won't know unless we try." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. That night, as we fell asleep tangled together, I realized that love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about showing up, even when you're scared. And with Sam, I was ready to show up, every time. Over the next couple of months, Sam and I settled into something that felt real. Not the kind of whirlwind romance that burns out fast, but a steady, quiet kind of growing into each other. We had our little routines, coffee runs at that same cafe, late-night talks on his fire escape, the occasional spontaneous road trip to nowhere in particular. But like any real thing worth holding on to, it wasn't without its challenges. Sam's Uber schedule was all over the place, which made planning tricky. Some nights he'd be working late, others he'd have a day off and want to just sleep in. I had my own crazy work hours too, and sometimes when we tried to coordinate, we'd both end up frustrated, wondering if this was sustainable. One evening, I showed up at his place unannounced. I was in the neighborhood and figured, what the hell? Maybe he was home. The door was cracked open a bit, so I peeked in and called his name softly. No answer. I walked in, and the apartment was dark except for the glow of his laptop screen at the kitchen table. Sam was hunched over, rubbing his eyes, clearly exhausted. "Hey," I said, setting my bag down. He looked up, surprised but happy to see me. "Hey, didn't expect you." I pulled up a chair. "You okay? You look wiped." He sighed and leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "It's just been a rough week. Some crazy rides, long hours, and then some family stuff I didn't see coming." I nodded, knowing the family stuff had been a sore point for him before. "Do you want to talk about it?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Not tonight. But thanks for being here." We sat together in silence for a while, the kind of silence that's comfortable and healing. Eventually, I reached over and gave his hand a squeeze. "You don't have to carry it all alone, you know." He smiled, a little weary but grateful. "I'm trying not to." This was real. Being there for each other when things weren't perfect. A few days later, I surprised him with tickets to a small show at a local venue. It was a band he used to talk about, one he said inspired him to pick up the guitar again. The night was electric, watching him light up in that crowd, singing along, eyes shining. It was like seeing the side of him that had been tucked away for too long. After the show, we walked through the city streets, the night humming around us. "I've been thinking," he said, voice low, "about trying to play again. Maybe not professionally, but just for me. For us." My heart swelled. "I'd love to hear you play." He looked at me with that shy smile. "Maybe you could be my first audience." I laughed, brushing a stray hair from his face. "It's a date." But even as things blossomed, the doubts crept in sometimes. Like the night he drove me home from a friend's party, and we got stuck in traffic for an hour. The tension in the car was palpable, the silence heavy. Finally, he broke it. "I'm scared this won't last, that eventually I'll just be your Uber driver again, and you'll disappear like any other fare." I reached back and grabbed his hand, holding it tight. "Hey, no disappearing. I'm not that guy." He smiled, but the worry didn't fully leave his eyes. I realized then how much this meant to him, how vulnerable he was letting himself be. I squeezed his hand. "We're in this together, no matter how messy or complicated it gets." He nodded, leaning over to kiss my cheek. That night, as I lay in bed later, I thought about how far we'd come, from a random ride in a stranger's car to something real and messy and beautiful. And I knew, for the first time in a long time, that I wasn't just along for the ride. I was steering us both towards something worth holding on to. A few weeks after the show, things between Sam and me started feeling less like the tentative steps of something new and more like the comfortable rhythm of a partnership. We'd figured out the little ways to be there for each other, even when life threw curveballs. One evening, I was at his place, lounging on his couch while he fiddled with his old guitar. He'd started playing again, sometimes softly strumming melodies that filled the apartment with warmth. I loved hearing him lose himself in those moments, the way his fingers moved over the strings like they remembered something deep inside. "You're getting good," I teased, nudging him gently. He chuckled without looking up. "Only because I have a hell of a patient audience," I smiled, reaching for his hand. There was a quiet intimacy in that simple touch, one that spoke volumes. But then, out of nowhere, Sam's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, and his smile faded. "Work," he muttered. I knew what that meant. An unexpected ride request, probably for a long haul or some late-night nightmare of a destination. He looked torn, glancing between me and the phone. "You don't have to take it," I said softly. "You've already done enough today." He shook his head. "It's the way I pay the bills. I can't just say no." I bit my lip, wanting to argue, but knowing this was part of his reality. He grabbed his jacket and keys, hesitating at the door. "Be safe," I said, standing to give him a quick hug. He paused, then leaned in and kissed me, a brief, urgent kiss that left both of us breathless. "See you soon," he whispered before slipping out. Left alone, I felt this gnawing ache, the reminder that our worlds weren't always going to align perfectly. The night stretched on, and I found myself scrolling through messages, waiting for the familiar ping that Sam had finished his shift. When the text, "Talk tomorrow?" I sighed in relief, but also with a weight I couldn't shake. The next day, we met for brunch at a quiet spot Sam had discovered near the park. As we sat across from each other, I could see the exhaustion etched into his features. "You okay?" I asked, concerned. He nodded but didn't meet my eyes. "Yeah, just tired." I reached across the table, squeezing his hand. "If this ever gets too much, you can tell me." He smiled weakly. "I know, and I appreciate that." We talked about the future, about plans that felt both exciting and scary. Sam mentioned wanting to cut back on driving, maybe focus more on music, but the uncertainty of income made it complicated. I wanted to be supportive, but I also understood the reality pressing on him. "Whatever you decide, I'm here," I said. "We'll figure it out together." He looked at me, a flicker of hope brightening his eyes. That afternoon, we wandered through the park, the city buzzing softly around us. The sun filtered through the trees, casting golden light over everything. It felt like a perfect moment, a glimpse of what we could have if we kept choosing each other. As we sat on a bench, Sam leaned his head on my shoulder. "I'm glad that night didn't end," he said quietly. I smiled, resting my cheek against his hair. "Neither am I." In that moment, I realized that love isn't always easy or straightforward. Sometimes it's messy, uncertain, and full of doubts, but it's also about being present, showing up even when it's hard. And with Sam, I was ready to take that ride, wherever it led. It wasn't some grand gesture or perfect moment that made me realize how far we'd come. It was the quiet, everyday stuff, like waking up to a message from Sam, asking if I wanted to grab coffee before work. Or him showing up at my apartment with that slightly nervous smile, carrying his guitar in one hand and a takeout bag in the other. One weekend, after months of patching together time between his unpredictable schedule and mine, Sam invited me over for dinner. He'd cooked something simple but thoughtful, and the hours slipped by as we shared food, music, and laughter. That night, as we sat side by side on his couch, I caught myself thinking, this is what I'd been missing. The feeling of someone who sees you, really sees you, and still wants to stick around. A few weeks later, Sam played his first small gig in years. I was there, front row in the little crowded bar, watching him pour everything into the music. When he looked my way and smiled mid-song, my heart swelled with pride and something deeper I'd been too scared to name. Afterward, as we walked home beneath the city lights, Sam slipped his hand into mine. "Thanks for believing in me," he said softly. I squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for letting me in." It wasn't magic or fireworks, but a steady, honest connection that grew from a chance encounter in the backseat of an Uber. We'd faced doubts, exhaustion, and the unpredictability of life, but what mattered was that we chose each other, even on the hard days. One evening, months after that first ride that didn't want to end, we sat on his fire escape looking out over the city skyline. The world felt big and messy, but right there, wrapped in his arms, I knew I was exactly where I was supposed to be. Sometimes the best kind of love is the kind that sneaks up on you, unassuming, imperfect, and real. And I wouldn't trade this ride for anything.